Story 1: The Crawl Space Intruder. What would you do if the sanctuary of your home turned into a living nightmare? For one woman. Her cozy rental held a horrifying secret, a man hiding beneath her floorboards, plotting in the shadows. It was a small, charming house. Nothing fancy. But it had an undeniable warmth about it. Tucked away in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of town. There was something undeniably comforting about it, a space that felt personal. Like it had seen 1,000 families come and go but was still standing strong. A witness to decades of secrets. But it wasn't perfect. Nothing ever is. The house had a crawl space underneath. Access through a small wooden hatch hidden beneath the floorboards in the laundry room. The door was old, weathered, but still functional. It wasn't particularly large, just enough space for someone to crawl through, to hide away from the world above. I never thought much of it at first. To be honest, I figured it was just a relic of the house's past. Who would want to be down there? Cobwebs, rats, dust, nothing worth thinking about. I hadn't even bothered to look inside. It started on an ordinary evening. I'd had a long day at work. The kind that drained you both physically and mentally. The kind that made you yearn for nothing more than the comfort of your bed, a hot shower, and the peace that comes from being alone. I came home later than usual. Around 9 p.m. The weight of the world still on my shoulders. The house was silent when I stepped inside. I could smell the faint scent of laundry detergent lingering in the air, mixing with the musty scent of old wood. It was almost too quiet. Too still. I shrugged it off as the tiredness making me feel jumpy as I walked through the door. But something wasn't right. I stepped into the laundry room. And that's when I noticed it. The light was on. The small overhead light in the laundry room was glowing a soft yellow. Now, I could have sworn I'd turned it off that morning when I left. I made a habit of double-checking everything before I went out. Especially in the laundry room where I kept all my cleaning supplies. But there it was. On. I chalked it up to me being absent-minded. Perhaps rushing out the door too quickly that morning. I flicked the switch off with a slight sigh. But as I turned to walk away, something caught my eye. The hatch to the crawl space was slightly ajar. That wasn't right. It had been securely shut that morning. I knew it. I remembered locking it before leaving. I stood frozen for a moment, staring at the hatch. My heart began to thump a little faster. A sense of unease creeping up my spine. I told myself it had to be nothing. Maybe the wind had somehow loosened the latch. Or it had shifted while I was away. But I wasn't convinced. I approached the hatch slowly, cautiously, and peered into the dark space beneath the house. There was no sound, no skittering of rats or movement. It was just quiet. Still. I leaned over and checked the lock. It was intact. But the hatch was still slightly ajar. Something wasn't right. I pushed the door shut. Harder than necessary. The small creak of the wood echoed through the room. For a moment, I stood there, contemplating whether to call someone to check it out. But dismissed the thought. I didn't want to seem paranoid. Later that night, I went to bed. The weight of the day still hanging heavy on me. I turned off the lights and pulled the blankets tightly around me. The wind outside was strong, howling against the windows. But that was nothing unusual. I drifted off to sleep. The quiet hum of the house surrounding me. That is, until I was woken by the faintest sound. At first, I thought it was the wind again, rattling the windows. But as I lay there in the dark, my senses began to sharpen. It wasn't the wind. It was thumping. A rhythmic thumping. Almost like footsteps. But heavier. More deliberate. I lay still in my bed. Barely breathing. My mind racing. It was coming from below. The laundry room. The crawl space. My stomach dropped. I knew what I had heard earlier. The hatch had been open. Had someone gotten in? I froze. Listening intently. The sound grew louder. Closer. A faint thud, thud, thud. It was hard to breathe now. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and slowly, quietly, crept out of bed. The cold floor beneath my bare feet sent a shiver up my spine. But I ignored it. Moving silently toward the laundry room. I opened the door just a crack. Enough to peer inside. Everything was dark. Silent. The light was off now. The thumping had stopped. But there, in the middle of the room, I saw it. The hatch was open. Wider than before. I felt my chest tighten. My hands shook as I turned the light on. The light flickered once and then stabilized, casting a pale glow on the floor. My eyes darted to the hatch. The box of detergent I'd placed on top of it was now pushed to the side. I stared in disbelief. I had locked it. I knew I had locked it. With my heart pounding in my chest, I slowly approached the hatch. I felt a rush of cold air rising from the crawl space. But there was no sound now. I looked down. My fingers brushing the edge of the hatch. Before I could even make a decision on what to do next, I heard a noise from behind me. A faint shuffle of footsteps. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I spun around so quickly I almost lost my balance. My breath caught in my throat. There, in the doorway to the hallway, stood a figure. A man. He was crouched down. His face pale and gaunt. His eyes wide open. Unblinking. His skin was sickly. Like something that had been hidden away for far too long. His clothes were torn. Disheveled. And he stood there. In my laundry room. As if he belonged. My heart raced as I locked eyes with him. Both of us startled by the sudden confrontation. He didn't move. His mouth was slightly open. As though he was about to speak. But no words came out. My instincts screamed at me to run. To get out of there. But my body was frozen. I could feel his presence. As if it was suffocating the very air around me. His breath was shallow. Like he hadn't spoken or breathed properly in days. I had no idea how he had gotten in. How long he had been hiding in the crawl space. But what truly terrified me was the look on his face. And then, as if to complete the nightmare, he reached into his bag and pulled out a small, tattered notebook. His fingers flipped it open, revealing pages filled with tiny, obsessive handwriting. It was all about me. Notes on my daily routine. The exact time I left for work. What I wore. What time I came home. He had been watching me. He had been studying me. His eyes flickered to mine again. And I finally broke free of the shock. I screamed. My voice tearing through the silence of the room. I turned and bolted for the door. My legs moving faster than I ever thought possible. I heard him shuffle after me. But I didn't look back. I ran out into the night. Banging on my neighbor's door. Desperate for help. When the police arrived, they found him. He was hiding in the crawl space. Barely clothed. with a small mattress and food wrappers strewn about the dirt floor. The hatch had been tampered with. And from the looks of it, he had been living there for days. Weeks. Maybe even longer. But the worst part came when the police found the notebook. They wouldn't tell me everything that was written in it. But I didn't need to know. The thought that someone had been silently observing me, learning my routine, planning, it made my skin crawl. I moved out of the house the next week, leaving behind everything I had built in that small, quiet neighborhood. But no matter how far I ran, I couldn't shake the thought, what were his plans for me? What had he intended to do? I still don't know. And maybe, in some ways, it's better that I don't. Sometimes, the scariest part of life is not knowing what's waiting for you in the shadows. But sometimes, it's knowing that danger can look like someone you trust. In the next story, a man on his late-night walk discovers just how terrifying it is when the danger seems to come from those who should protect you. Story 2, The Fake Police Encounter. Berlin is a city that never truly sleeps. Its streets, a mix of cobblestone charm and modern bustle, feel alive even late into the night. But when the crowds thin and the neon lights cast eerie shadows, the city can take on a different, more sinister tone. For one man, a quick late-night errand turned into a harrowing experience that he'll never forget. It was around 3 a.m. on a bitterly cold November night. The kind of cold that nips at your fingers and makes you wish you'd stayed in bed. I'd been lounging at home, chatting with friends online, and had just realized I was out of snacks, a catastrophic end to any gaming session. I decided to brave the chill for a quick trip to the corner shop. A small, dimly lit convenience store just a few blocks away.
Berlin at night can feel desolate but not dangerous. I had walked these streets hundreds of times, always confident in the city's quiet order. But tonight would be different. Tonight, the streets had shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking.
As I lit a small joint to warm myself against the cold, a rare indulgence on a public street, I noticed a group of men standing at the corner up ahead. They were huddled together, their breaths forming clouds in the frosty air. There was nothing particularly unusual about them at first glance. But the way their eyes followed me as I approached sent a faint shiver down my spine. I told myself not to overthink it. Groups of men often loitered in this part of town, especially late at night. Still, as I passed, I could feel their gazes burning into my back. My heart quickened slightly. But I kept walking, head down, focusing on the flickering neon sign of the shop just ahead. Then I heard it, a sharp voice cutting through the stillness. Routine ID check. Show me your identification. I froze mid-step, the words hitting me like a slap. My mind raced. An ID check? At this hour? On this empty street? Turning slowly, I saw two of the men approaching me. Their expressions stern but casual. "We're undercover police," one of them said, pulling a badge from his pocket. The badge was small and flashed briefly in the dim light, giving me no time to study it. The others hung back, watching, their faces unreadable. Smoking weed in public is illegal, you know, the man continued, his tone accusatory. I stammered a reply, my voice shaky. I wasn't aware. I'm sorry. Let's see what's in your pockets, the man demanded, his voice sharp now. Alarm bells were ringing in my head. Something felt off. The badge didn't look quite right, too shiny, too perfect. And undercover cops? They wouldn't call out so publicly. Would they? Still. The rational part of me argued. What if they really are police? What if I refuse and make things worse? My thoughts were a whirlwind of panic. One of the men stepped closer. His pupils wide and black, glinting in the faint light. His grin was smug. Predatory. "Let's go," he said, motioning for me to empty my pockets. I hesitated, reaching into my coat to pull out harmless items, a pack of gum, a lighter. I prayed they wouldn't press further. But the leader wasn't satisfied. "Your wallet," he said, his tone now a command. I froze again, my heart sinking. My wallet. I remembered the cash tucked inside, 300 euros from tips I hadn't yet deposited. Losing that money would crush me financially. But something deeper gnawed at me. It wasn't just about the cash. It was about the way they circled me like wolves. Their voices low and taunting. That's when I saw it, a glint of metal tucked into the waistband of the man's jeans. A gun. My panic hit a breaking point. I could feel my legs trembling, my breath catching in my throat. I needed to think fast. Fighting was out of the question, there were too many of them. Running? Not an option with their proximity. And then, like a flash of lightning, an idea struck me. I cleared my throat, straightened my back, and in the thickest Russian accent I could muster, I said, "I'm meeting my friends. Russians. They're coming soon." The leader paused, his grin faltering for a split second. I caught a flicker of confusion in his eyes. The others exchanged glances, muttering quietly among themselves. Russians. The fear of Russian gangs was a well-known undercurrent in this area. They were notorious. Their reputation enough to make even the most hardened criminals think twice. The leader tried to maintain his composure. "Your friends." "Huh?" he said. But his voice lacked the confidence it had moments ago. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Yes. Big guys. Very protective." The group fell silent, their earlier bravado replaced with uncertainty. The leader's eyes darted between me and the street, weighing his options. Finally, he sighed, gesturing toward the shop. "Fine. Buy us something to drink. And we'll forget this ever happened." Relief washed over me. But I hid it well. "Of course," I said, nodding quickly. We walked together into the store, the fluorescent lights feeling harsher than ever. They grabbed a six-pack of soda, and I paid, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the bills. As we stepped back outside, I held my breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But to my astonishment, they simply walked away, disappearing into the shadows without another word. I stood there for a moment, stunned. The adrenaline still coursed through my veins, my mind racing with what-ifs. What if they hadn't believed me? What if I'd handed over my wallet? What if they'd decided to do more than just intimidate me? The cold air bit at my cheeks as I finally made my way home, clutching my coat tightly around me. I couldn't shake the feeling of their eyes on me, even after I locked the door behind me. That night, I learned a lesson I wouldn't soon forget: trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. But as I would soon find out, danger doesn't always vanish when you step inside your home. Sometimes, it's waiting just outside your door, biding its time, listening, watching. Story 3: The Porch Intruder. Imagine hearing a voice outside your room in the dead of night. It's faint at first, barely audible through the stillness. You try to tell yourself it's nothing, maybe a passing car, the wind brushing against the walls. But then it grows louder, more persistent. And suddenly, you realize it's not just a noise. It's a voice. And it's coming from your porch. It had been a quiet evening. The kind where the silence feels thicker than usual. I had just returned home from a family outing, a Thanksgiving dinner and a movie. The night air was crisp. A thin layer of frost coating the driveway as I parked my car and made my way inside. My apartment was tucked in the back of a divided house, with its own little porch that led directly into my kitchen. After a long day, I craved nothing more than to unwind. I settled into my bedroom, which, unfortunately, had a strange architectural quirk, a door that led directly onto the porch. The door had been blocked by my dresser since I moved in. But its presence always unnerved me slightly. What was it even for? Who thought it was a good idea to have a bedroom open to an exterior space? Shrugging off the thought, I turned to my work, spending the next 30 minutes at my desk, answering emails and tying up loose ends from the day. The house was silent except for the soft hum of my laptop. And then I heard it. At first, it was faint, like a whisper carried on the breeze. A man's voice, low and continuous, barely distinguishable through the walls. I paused, tilting my head toward the sound. Was it my upstairs neighbor? His bedroom was directly above mine. But I'd lived here long enough to know the walls weren't that thin. I'd never heard his voice seep through before. The more I listened, the more certain I became, it wasn't coming from above. It was coming from outside. I stood, my chair scraping against the floor, and moved closer to the blocked door. My heart thudded louder with each step. The voice continued, a steady stream of words, spoken too fast and too low for me to make out. My hand hovered over the dresser, pressing against the wood as if I could feel the vibrations of his words through it. This couldn't be happening. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was someone walking by on the street, or a passerby taking a phone call near my porch. That made sense, didn't it? I crept to my bedroom window, which overlooked the porch from the side. Carefully, I lifted the curtain just enough to peek outside. The porch was bathed in moonlight, its wooden boards gleaming with frost. At first, I saw nothing. And then I did. A man was sitting cross-legged in the middle of the porch. His back was to me. His long, scraggly hair hanging down in uneven clumps. He rocked back and forth slowly, his body swaying in rhythm with his muttering. His voice was steady, like he was reciting something he had memorized, over and over again. My heart hammered in my chest as I lowered the curtain. My mind raced. Who was this man? How long had he been there? And why was he muttering outside my door? For what felt like an eternity, I stood frozen in place, torn between calling the police and confronting him myself. But fear kept me rooted. What if he was dangerous? What if he had a weapon? I tried to rationalize. Maybe he was homeless, looking for a place to stay warm. Maybe he was drunk or high, his muttering just a byproduct of whatever substances he was on. But as I pressed my ear against the door, listening to his words more clearly, I realized something chilling. He wasn't just muttering random nonsense. He was repeating a name. My name. Your name. Your name. Your name. I recoiled, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a gasp. How did he know my name? Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. But just as I was about to hit call, I stopped. The porch door creaked. My blood ran cold. He was moving. I scrambled back to the window, lifting the curtain just enough to see him. He had risen to his feet now, his lanky frame towering in the moonlight. His hands were up, palms facing outward in a strange, almost playful gesture. He turned his head slightly, as if sensing my gaze. And then, in a voice that sent shivers down my spine, he said, "My name is Evan." I let the curtain drop, stepping back as the floor creaked beneath me. Evan. Who was Evan? Why was he here? And how did he know my name? My breath came in shallow gasps as I tried to make sense of the situation. From the other side of the door, his voice came again, soft and almost sing-song. "I know. I'm hiding." Something about the way he said it, like a child playing hide-and-seek, pushed me over the edge. I wasn't thinking anymore, I was reacting. I flung open the bedroom door and stormed down the hallway toward the porch. Fear had been replaced by a surge of adrenaline-fueled anger. How dare he invade my space like this? The kitchen was dark as I yanked open the main door to the porch, ready to confront him. "Get out!" I screamed, my voice echoing into the night. "Get the hell out of here!" But Evan didn't flinch. He turned slowly, his face half hidden in shadow, and smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile you'd see on someone who knew they had the upper hand. I know, he said, his voice still light, almost teasing. "I'm hiding." I grabbed the nearest object, a broom leaning against the wall, and brandished it like a weapon. "Get out. Or I swear to God, I'll call the cops." Finally, he raised his hands in mock surrender, taking a slow step back. All right," he said, his tone infuriatingly calm. "I'm leaving." He turned and shuffled off the porch, his movements deliberate and slow, as if he had all the time in the world. I stood there for a long time after he disappeared into the shadows, the broom still clenched in my hands. My body was trembling now, the adrenaline fading and leaving behind a raw, aching fear. The police came later, taking my statement and promising to patrol the area. But I knew, deep down, that they wouldn't find him. People like Evan didn't just vanish, they lingered, like a shadow you couldn't quite get rid of. From that night on, I double-checked every lock, every window, every possible way someone could get in. But even with the doors bolted and the lights on, I couldn't shake the feeling that Evan was still out there, watching, waiting. But as I would soon learn, Evan wasn't the only one who would blur the lines between fear and paranoia. Sometimes, the terror follows you, step by step, turn by turn, until you can't tell if you're running from a threat or from your own shadow. Even now, long after I left that house behind, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I hear the soft creak of a wooden hatch opening somewhere in the darkness. I tell myself it's just my imagination, just a lingering fear.
But every now and then, I wonder,
what if he wasn't alone? What if there was someone else down there? Someone who never got caught? Someone still waiting beneath another house? Beneath someone else's floorboards, watching? What would you do if you found out someone had been living under your home, studying your every move? Let me know in the comments. And if you love spine-chilling true horror stories, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Wolf Tells. Because sometimes the scariest things aren't ghosts or monsters, sometimes they're real. Sleep well, if you can.